Send me $2,800 for prom. My brother said. I replied, earn it yourself. A few minutes later, my parents texted, pay or get out of this family. That night, I pressed, cancel, cancel, cancel everything. By 8:30 the next morning, my name is Caleb, and at 35, I've built a life most people would consider a success. I'm an architect in Austin, Texas, living in a downtown apartment with a view that costs more than my parents' mortgage. I designed that life from the ground up, brick by brick, without a single handout. To understand the story I'm about to tell you, you need to understand that foundation. I wasn't just the older son in my family. I was the invisible one. My brother, Leo, is 17 years younger than me. He was the miracle baby, the golden child, the one they got a second chance to raise right. From the moment he was born, I might as well have been a ghost at the dinner table. Everything revolved around him. While I was scraping together cash from my part-time job at a hardware store to buy my first beat-up car, they were pouring their savings into a trust fund for his future college education. I learned early on that my only way forward was a path I had to pave myself. The real breaking point, the moment I truly understood my place in the family, happened on my 18th birthday. I had been saving for months, working double shifts, planning to use the money as a down payment on a small apartment near the community college. It was my escape plan. That morning, my father came into my room, his face grim. Leo, who had just gotten his learner's permit, had taken my mother's car for a joyride the night before and wrapped it around a telephone pole. He was fine, not a scratch on him. The car was not. We need the money, Caleb, my father said, not even looking me in the eye. He meant my money, my escape money. The insurance won't cover all of it, and your mother needs the car for work. I remember the feeling, a cold dread washing over me. That's my college money, Dad. Leo crashed the car. He should be the one to figure it out. My mother appeared in the doorway then, her arms crossed. Her voice was sharp, like broken glass. He's a child. You're an adult now. You have a responsibility to this family. A responsibility. Felt like a chain. I stood my ground. For the first time in my life, I said no. I told them it wasn't fair, that I had worked too hard for it. The argument didn't last long. It ended with my father pointing to the door. If you're not going to be part of this family, then you can get out, he said. So I did. I packed a duffel bag, took my savings, and left. I spent the next year sleeping on a friend's couch, working 2 jobs, and putting myself through school. I never asked them for a dime. Over the years, a sort of fragile truce formed. Once I started my career and became successful, the dynamic shifted. I was no longer the disobedient son. I was the family safety net. They saw my salary, my stability, and they saw an opportunity. They never apologized for kicking me out. Instead, they acted as if it had been a necessary lesson that forged me into the man I became. A man they could now depend on. I let them believe it because it was easier. It was the only way I could have any semblance of a family. I was their responsible, successful son, the one who could fix things. And my brother, Leo, was the one who was allowed to break them. About 4 years ago, I made a mistake. It was born out of a mixture of guilt, duty, and a foolish hope that maybe things could be different. My mother called me, her voice thick with panic. She said the property taxes were due, and they were short. She made it sound like they were on the verge of losing the house. I could hear my father muttering in the background about his pride. It was a well-rehearsed performance. So I sent the money, and a few months later it was another emergency. The water heater broke. Then the roof was leaking. The calls became a regular occurrence, always with a new crisis that required my immediate financial intervention. I was busy, working 60-hour weeks trying to get my own firm off the ground. I didn't have time to scrutinize their lives. I just wanted to solve the problem and get back to work. That's when I came up with the idea for the joint family account. I told them it was for emergencies and basic living expenses, utilities, groceries, that sort of thing. I set up an automatic transfer of a few $1,000s from my account every month. In my mind, I was doing the right thing. I was easing their stress, giving them a cushion so they wouldn't have to call me in a panic every time a bill came due. I thought I was being a good son. What I was really doing was handing them a blank check, signed with my trust. I rarely looked at the statements. I was too busy, and honestly, I didn't want to know. I didn't want to be the kind of son who micromanaged his parents. I assumed they would use it responsibly. I wanted to believe they were the people they pretended to be, proud, hardworking folks who just needed a little help. There were signs, of course, little red flags I chose to ignore. One time, about a year after I set up the account, my mom called about a massive leak in the roof that needed an immediate $5,000 repair. It was right before I was supposed to go on a vacation with some friends, a trip I'd been planning for a year. I canceled my trip. I felt terrible, picturing them with buckets all over the house. I transferred the money right away. A week later, I was scrolling through social media, and I saw a picture Leo had posted. He was standing in his bedroom, grinning like an idiot, and behind him on the wall was a brand new, massive flat-screen TV, the kind that costs thousands of dollars. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I called my mom and asked about it. "Oh, that old thing?" she said, her voice a little too breezy. "Leo got it on a huge sale. A real bargain. A bargain." I knew she was lying, but I let it go. Confronting them would have led to a huge fight, accusations of me being ungrateful and suspicious. It was easier to just hang up the phone, swallow the bitter taste in my mouth, and go back to work. I told myself it was a one-time thing. I told myself I was just helping them maintain a comfortable life. I didn't realize I wasn't funding their comfort. I was funding their deception. And that account wasn't a safety net. It was a well of lies, and I was the only one pouring anything into it. The day it all fell apart started like any other Tuesday. I was in the middle of a tense presentation with a major client, trying to walk them through a complex structural design. My phone was on the table, set to silent, but the screen kept lighting up, pulling at the corner of my eye. I ignored it, focusing on the blueprints in front of me. Finally, during a short break, I picked it up. There was a string of missed calls and texts, all from my brother, Leo. The last message was in all caps, demanding and arrogant, just like him. "Send me $2,800 for prom. Now." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. $2,800. For a high school dance. A night of cheap punch and awkward dancing. I thought about the suit I wore to my own prom, a rental that cost $40 I'd earned mowing lawns. The rage I felt was so sudden and hot it almost made me dizzy. I was in the middle of a multi-million-dollar project, stressed out of my mind, and this was the emergency that couldn't wait. My fingers flew across the screen, my reply short and sharp. "No way. Get a job and earn it yourself." I hit send and put the phone down, trying to regain my professional composure. I expected a whiny text back, maybe some name-calling. Instead, my phone started buzzing again almost immediately. It was him. I sighed, declined the call, and tried to focus on my client. But he called again, and again. On the fourth try, knowing he wouldn't stop, I excused myself from the conference room and stepped into the hallway, answering with a clipped, "What, Leo?" His voice was shrill, dripping with the entitlement I'd come to despise. "What's your problem, Caleb? I need the money." "No, you don't need it," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "You want it. There's a difference. It's prom, not open-heart surgery. Plenty of kids work part-time to pay for it. You should try it." He scoffed, a sound of pure disdain. "Work? Are you kidding me? Why should I have to work when you're sitting on piles of money? It's just prom. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. It's a dance, Leo, and it's my money that I work for." The answer is no. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, like a toddler about to throw a tantrum. "You're so cheap. You don't get it. I deserve this. Mom and Dad said you'd pay. It's my right." His right. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. "You don't have a right to a single cent of my money," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You need to grow up. You're ruining everything," he screamed, his voice cracking with adolescent rage. Then he hung up. I stood there in the sterile hallway of my office building, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. ruining everything. I had spent my entire adult life trying to build something, while he had spent his entire life having everything handed to him. The unfairness of it all, the sheer, blatant injustice, hit me harder than ever before. This wasn't just about money for a prom. It was about 17 years of resentment coming to a boil, and I was done being the one who always had to be responsible. I walked back into the conference room and somehow managed to get through the rest of the meeting. I shook hands, smiled, and talked about load-bearing walls, all while a storm was raging inside me. My mind kept replaying Leo's words. Mom and Dad said you'd pay. They had promised him my money. They hadn't even asked me. They had just assumed, as they always did, that I would provide. As soon as the clients left, I slumped into my chair, my head in my hands. I expected another angry call from Leo, or maybe a guilt-tripping text from my mother. What I got was far worse. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. Pay for your brother's prom or don't bother calling yourself part of this family. I read it once, then twice. The words seemed to float off the screen, cold and sharp. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a discussion. It was an ultimatum. My own mother was threatening to disown me over a tuxedo and a limo for her spoiled teenage son. A second message popped up before I could even process the first. It was from my father. His was shorter, but it cut just as deep. Do the right thing, Caleb. The right thing. For years, I thought I had been doing the right thing. I'd sent them thousands upon thousands of dollars. I'd helped them with their mortgage, covered their car repairs, paid for their groceries when they were short. I had done it all without question, believing I was supporting my family. Now I saw the truth. Their love, their acceptance, their very definition of family had a price tag. And today, that price was $2,800. My hands started to tremble. This wasn't just about the money. This was about respect. It was about being seen as a person, not a walking ATM. I felt a surge of anger so profound it almost choked me, but underneath it was a deep, aching pain. The painful realization that maybe they had never really loved me for who I was, but only for what I could provide. The 18-year-old kid who was kicked out for protecting his future was now a 35-year-old man being threatened with the same exile for protecting his present. That night I couldn't work, couldn't eat. I just paced the floor of my apartment, from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city back to the cold marble of my kitchen, replaying their words in my head. Pay or get out of this family. The choice they gave me was no choice at all. They had already shown me what this family was. It was a one-way street of obligation, and I was tired of paying the toll. For years, I had held on to this thin, fragile thread connecting me to them, believing it was better than having nothing at all. But now I saw that the thread was a leash, and they were holding the end of it. Around midnight, exhausted and emotionally drained, I stopped pacing. I sat on my couch in the dark, the city lights twinkling below like 1,000 distant stars. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. I thought about the joint account, the automatic transfers, the years of lies and manipulation. And I made a choice. My thumb moved with a strange sense of calm, a finality that was both terrifying and liberating. I pressed the screen. Cancel. Cancel. Cancel everything. I woke up the next morning feeling strangely hollow. The anger from the night before had cooled into a hard, cold resolve. The automatic transfers were stopped. The financial leash was cut. I expected my phone to be blowing up, but it was silent. The silence was almost more unnerving than their anger. I got ready for work, going through the motions, my mind a blank slate. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if the ground beneath me would hold. It was around 8:30 a.m., just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee at the office, that the first tremor hit. An email popped into my inbox. The subject line, in bold red letters from my bank, screamed, "Urgent transaction alert." My heart started to pound a little faster. I opened it. The email was a notification regarding the joint family account, the one I had foolishly left open. It informed me that a wire transfer of $5,000 had been initiated that morning. It was flagged as unusual activity because it was going to an account I had never transferred to before, and it required my secondary approval. $5,000. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about prom anymore. This was something else entirely. They must have woken up, seen the automatic transfers were gone, and in a panic tried to pull out a large sum before I could completely lock them out. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After threatening to disown me, their first move was to try and drain the account. My hands were shaking as I clicked the Deny Transaction button. Then I immediately called the bank's fraud department to put a temporary freeze on all outgoing transfers from that account. As I was on the phone, another call came through. It was Leo. I let the bank hold and switched over, my voice flat and void of emotion. "What do you want, Leo?" "The transfer didn't go through," he said, without any preamble. There was an edge of panic in his voice that I had never heard before. "It says it needs your approval." "Approve it." "Approve what?" "A $5,000 transfer I know nothing about?" "What's going on, Leo? What is that money for?" He was evasive, his tone turning sharp and defensive. "It's for bills. For Mom and Dad. Just approve it, Caleb." "Why are you always so suspicious?" "I'm suspicious because my family threatened to disown me yesterday, and today they're trying to secretly wire $5,000 out of an account I fund." I shot back. $5,000 just vanished, Leo. Or it tried to. "You know anything about it?" He laughed, but it was a cold, nervous sound. "You're overreacting. It's probably nothing. Just a mix-up." Then, before I could press him further, he hung up. I switched back to the bank and made the freeze permanent. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. He wasn't just dodging the question. He was hiding something. Something big. His panic felt real. This was more than just a spoiled kid trying to get his way. This was desperation. I couldn't trust them. I couldn't believe a word they said. I needed answers, and I knew I wasn't going to get them from my family. I had been a fool for too long. It was time to find out just how deep their lies went. I couldn't focus on work for the rest of the day. The conversation with Leo, the mysterious $5,000 transfer. It all swirled in my head, forming a dark cloud of suspicion. That afternoon, I called the one person I knew I could trust completely, my best friend, Mark. Mark and I had been friends since college, and now he was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer whose office was just a few blocks from mine. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice tight. "It's about my family. It's bad." "My office, 6 p.m., he said, no questions asked. That evening, I sat across from him in his dimly lit office, the shelves overflowing with legal books. The smell of old paper and coffee filled the air. I laid it all out for him. The prom demand, the ultimatum from my parents, and the failed wire transfer that morning. I gave him the login credentials for the joint account, which I, as the primary account holder, had full access to. "Something's wrong with the family account, Mark," I said, the frustration evident in my voice. "I need to know what they've been doing with it." Mark nodded, his expression calm but focused. He opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's pull the records," he said. "All of them. Let's see what the money has been doing." For the next hour, we sat in near silence, broken only by the click of his keyboard and my occasional muttered curse as the truth began to unfold on the screen. He pulled up the transaction history for the past 4 years, going back to the very first deposit I ever made. At first, it was what I expected. Payments to the electric company, the water board, the local grocery store. But as we scrolled further, the nature of the withdrawals began to change. "Okay, here's something," Mark said, pointing at the screen. "A monthly payment of $800 to a luxury car dealership. Every month, for the last 2 years. I stared, confused. "They drive a 10-year-old sedan." "Not according to this," Mark said, his brow furrowing. He did a quick search. The dealership specialized in high-end sports cars. The payments were for a car loan. Car I had never seen. He kept digging. Then came the credit card payments. Not one, but 3 different cards, all with high balances. Every month, thousands of dollars from my account were being used to pay down debt I never knew they had. The payments were going to high-end department stores, expensive restaurants, and online boutiques. "They're living way beyond their means, Caleb," Mark said quietly. "And you're the one funding it." My stomach twisted into a knot. I thought about all the times my mother had told me they were struggling and barely getting by. It was all a lie. They weren't surviving. They were indulging. Mark kept scrolling, his expression growing grimmer. He found a series of payments to a travel agency. Another string of withdrawals from ATMs near resorts in Florida and California. They had been taking vacations, telling me they were visiting sick relatives. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. It was a systematic draining of my money, a carefully constructed facade of financial hardship designed to keep me sending cash. Each transaction was a small betrayal, but together, they formed a staggering portrait of deception. We weren't just looking at bank statements anymore. We were looking at the complete erosion of my trust, the rotting foundation of my family. And we were only just getting started. After another hour of digging, Mark leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow whistle. He spun his laptop around to face me. On the screen was a spreadsheet he had created, meticulously categorizing every withdrawal from the past 4 years. The numbers were stark and unforgiving. "Okay, here's the bottom line," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Over the last 48 months, you've deposited a total of $120,000 into that account. Their contributions? 0. He pointed to a column highlighted in red. "Of that money, I can trace approximately $20,000 to legitimate household expenses, utilities, groceries, property taxes, the things you thought you were paying for." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Then he pointed to another, much larger number at the bottom of the screen. "The rest, Caleb, $100,000, is gone. It went to credit card debt, that car loan, vacations, and what looks like a non-stop shopping spree for your brother. $100,000. The number hung in the air between us, obscene and unbelievable. A stab of betrayal, so sharp and intense, went through me. Felt like I couldn't breathe. I had trusted them. I had believed their lies. I had sacrificed my own time, my own peace of mind, thinking I was helping them survive. Instead, I had been bankrolling their fantasy life. My mind flashed back through all the phone calls, all the manufactured crises. My mother's tearful voice pleading for a little help to get through the month. My father's gruff assurances that it was just temporary. Every single one of them was a lie. They hadn't been struggling. They had been using me. "Look at this," Mark said, scrolling down to another section of the spreadsheet. He had pulled the detailed statements from their credit cards, which they were paying off with my money. The charges were sickening. Hundreds of dollars at a time for designer clothes from stores I knew Leo loved. $200 dinners at fancy restaurants. A $3,000 charge to a high-end event planner, dated 6 weeks ago. "A prom planner," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Mark nodded grimly. "It seems your brother's $2,800 prom demand wasn't for the whole package. It was probably just for his custom-made suit." I leaned back in the chair, my head reeling. It all made a sick kind of sense now. Leo hadn't been raised to be responsible. He had been raised to expect my money as his own personal allowance. My parents hadn't been protecting him. They had been enabling him, using my generosity as their tool. How could they do this? I asked more to myself than to Mark. The question was hollow. I already knew the answer. They did it because they could. They did it because I was too busy, too trusting, and too desperate for a family to see what was right in front of my face. "People can justify anything when they're desperate or greedy," Mark said softly. His words stung, but they were true. I stared at the screen, at the numbers that represented 4 years of my hard work being siphoned away. The trust one had in them was completely shattered. It wasn't just broken. It was ground into dust. This was more than just financial irresponsibility. This was a deep, calculated betrayal by the two people who were supposed to protect me, and the brother who had benefited from it all. And a dark, cold anger began to settle in my heart. I thought the $100,000 figure was the bottom. I thought the lies and the manipulation couldn't possibly get any worse. I was wrong. As we were about to log out, something caught Mark's eye. It was a recurring monthly payment, a large one, listed under a generic holding company name. It wasn't a credit card and it wasn't a car loan. It was a mortgage payment. That's strange, I said, leaning closer to the screen. I helped them refinance their house years ago. Their mortgage payment is much lower than this, and it goes to a different bank. Mark's expression turned serious. Caleb, this is a payment for a second mortgage. My blood ran cold. A second mortgage? On their house? They'd never get approved for that. Their credit is terrible. Maybe it's not on their house, Mark said, his fingers already typing furiously. He started running the name of the holding company through public records databases. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the quiet clicking of his keys. My heart was pounding in my chest, a sick premonition twisting in my gut. What else were they hiding? Finally, he stopped typing. He slowly turned to look at me, and his face was pale. "Oh, you are not going to believe this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The mortgage isn't for their house in the suburbs. It's for a condo. A brand new, one-bedroom luxury condo, downtown." I just stared at him, unable to process the words. Condo? Downtown? They could barely afford their own home. It made no sense. "Whose name is it in?" I managed to ask. Mark took a deep breath. "The mortgage is in your parents' names. But the deed, the title to the property, it's in Leo's name." The room started to spin. They had bought my brother a condominium, a secret apartment that I had been paying for without even knowing it. The lies were so much bigger, so much more audacious than I could have ever imagined. They hadn't just been funding his lifestyle. They had been funding his entire future, setting him up with a piece of prime real estate, all on my dime. And then Mark delivered the final, crushing blow. "I've seen this before," he said, his lawyer brain kicking into high gear. "They wouldn't have been approved for this loan on their own. I'm willing to bet they listed you as a co-signer or a guarantor. Without your knowledge. They might have forged your signature, Caleb." Forgery. The word hit me like a physical blow. The idea that my own parents would commit a felony, using my name and my good credit to enrich my brother, was beyond comprehension. It was a level of betrayal so profound that it felt unreal. Suddenly, everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The desperate, failed $5,000 transfer from that morning. It wasn't for bills. It wasn't for prom. Mark pulled up the address of the condo on a map. It was in a new high-rise, just a few blocks from a popular furniture district. $5,000, Mark said, reading my mind. That's a pretty standard deposit for a whole new set of designer furniture. They were furnishing his secret apartment. That's what the emergency was. The prom demand was just a distraction, a sideshow to their real grift. I wasn't their son. I was their Mark. I was the fool they were conning to build a life for the only child they ever truly cared about. The pain I felt was so immense. It was quickly being burned away by a white-hot rage. This was the end. There would be no more chances, no more excuses. It was time to burn it all to the ground. I walked out of Mark's office that night a different man. The hurt, trusting son was gone, replaced by someone cold, focused, and resolute. There was no more room for doubt or sentimentality. There was only the stark, ugly truth and the need for action. The next morning, Wednesday, I didn't go to the office. I sat at my kitchen table, the sun streaming in, and made my first call. It was to the bank. "I need to close a joint account immediately," I said to the representative, my voice calm and steady. It took less than 10 minutes. I answered security questions, confirmed my identity, and instructed them to transfer the remaining balance, a paltry few $100s, into my personal account and close the other one, effective immediately. Each "yes, that's correct" felt like snipping a wire on a bomb. The final click of the representative saying, "The account is now closed, sir," sounded like freedom. Step 1 was complete. Next, I opened my laptop and drafted an email. I kept it short, cold, and brutal. There would be no room for misinterpretation. The subject line was simply, "Account closed." The body of the email was addressed to my parents and Leo. "The joint account has been permanently closed. I know about the $100,000. I know about the credit cards, the car loan, and the secret condo you bought for Leo using my name. Do not contact me again. There will be no more money. I read it over once, my finger hovering over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. I felt a tremor of fear, the last dying gasp of the dutiful son I used to be. Then I thought of the condo, of their lies, of my forged signature, and I clicked send. It didn't take long. Within an hour, my phone began to explode. It was a coordinated assault. My sister called first, her voice a frantic, shrieking mess. "You can't do this," she screamed into the phone. "The payment for the furniture is due today. We need that account." She had admitted it. The sheer stupidity of it was almost comical. "Need it for what?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "To furnish the apartment you all bought behind my back with my money?" She sputtered, caught in her own lie. You don't understand. You're tearing this family apart," she finally managed, before hanging up. My mother's text came next. It was a long, rambling wall of words filled with exclamation points and accusations. "How dare you accuse us? We did everything for this family. We needed that money to survive. You're selfish and ungrateful." Survive? I almost laughed. Surviving on luxury vacations and secret real estate investments. My father, as usual, tried a different tactic. He called, his voice feigning a calm reasonableness that I now saw right through. "Caleb, son, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Let's just talk about this. Think about what you're doing to us, to your mother." "I have thought about it," I said, my voice like ice. "I've also thought about fraud and forgery. Tell me, Dad, should my next call be to a lawyer? Or maybe the police?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a dial tone. He had hung up. I sat there, my phone buzzing incessantly with their blocked calls and texts. It was a storm of their own making, and for the first time in my life I wasn't standing in the rain. I was watching from the shelter I had built for myself, and I felt nothing but a cold, clean sense of release. The ties were severed. Now it was time to see what they would do when they were truly on their own. I had expected them to be angry. I had expected them to be desperate. But I underestimated just how vicious they could be when their supply of free money was cut off. When the begging, the screaming, and the guilt-tripping didn't work, they moved on to a new strategy. Destruction. They decided that if they couldn't have my money, they would try to ruin my life. It started a few days later. I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but her voice on the phone was full of a righteous, syrupy disappointment. "Caleb, I am so ashamed of you," she began, without even a hello. "Your mother called me in tears. I can't believe how you're treating them. After everything they've done for you." I was confused. "Aunt Carol, you have no idea what's been going on." "Oh, I think I do," she said smugly. "Your parents told me everything. About your problem. The gambling. How brave of them to try and manage your finances for you, to keep you from losing everything. And this is how you repay them? By cutting them off and making these wild accusations." I felt the blood drain from my face. Gambling? They had concocted an entire story, a lie so perverse and twisted, to paint themselves as the heroes and me as the out-of-control villain. They weren't just denying what they did. They were rewriting history, turning my financial support into some kind of conservatorship for my own good. It was diabolical. "That's a lie," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Every word of that is a lie." "That's what they said you'd say," she replied, her tone dripping with pity. "I'll be praying for you, Caleb." She hung up. That was just the beginning. They launched a full-scale smear campaign. They called every relative, every old family friend they could think of, peddling the same sordid tale of my supposed addiction. They were trying to isolate me, to turn everyone against me so I would have no one to turn to and would be forced to crawl back to them. But Leo took it a step further. He took the fight to my professional life. One afternoon, I got a message from my boss, a senior partner at the firm, asking me to step into his office. My heart sank. I walked in, and he was sitting behind his desk with a strange look on his face. "Caleb," I got a very unusual email today, he said, turning his computer screen towards me. It was from Leo. The email was a rambling, poorly written diatribe, accusing me of being financially unstable, of having a serious spending problem, and hinting that I might be a liability to the firm. He had tried to poison my career, the one thing I had built for myself, away from their toxic influence. Fortunately, my boss was a smart man. He saw the email for what it was, a desperate, malicious attack. I'm assuming this is some kind of family drama? He asked, already hitting the delete button. Don't worry, it's not going anywhere. I was relieved, but also deeply shaken. They had tried to destroy my reputation. They had tried to get me fired. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a war, and they were willing to burn everything I had to the ground to win. The last shred of familial feeling I had for them died in that office. They weren't just my abusers anymore. They were my enemies, being attacked on all fronts by the very people who were supposed to be my family, pushed me over the edge. Their lies, their attempts to ruin my career, it was the final straw. I was done hiding. I was done being the quiet victim. It was time for a confrontation, but this time it would be on my terms, with undeniable proof. A week later, I drove to their house in the suburbs. It was a Saturday afternoon. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't want to give them time to prepare, to rehearse their lies. In the passenger seat next to me was a leather briefcase. It didn't contain architectural drawings. It contained my ammunition, copies of the bank statements, the credit card bills, the car loan agreement, and the crown jewel, a certified copy of the deed and mortgage documents for Leo's secret condo. I walked up to the door and used my old key. I didn't knock. I walked straight into their living room, where the three of them were sitting watching TV. The moment they saw me, the air crackled with tension. My mother stood up, her face a mask of fake concern. "Caleb, what are you doing here? We were so worried." "Save it," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. I walked to the coffee table and opened the briefcase. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I was eerily calm. "We're going to talk. And for once, you're going to listen." I started laying out the documents, one by one, like a poker player revealing a winning hand. "This," I said, sliding a bank summary across the table, "is the $100,000 of my money that you spent over the last 4 years. This," I continued, adding the credit card statements, "is what you spent it on. Designer clothes for Leo. Vacations you told me you couldn't afford. Dinners that cost more than my first month's rent." My mother started to protest, her voice rising. "We had expenses. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, not looking at her. I laid down the car loan paperwork. "I understand this $600 monthly payment for a sports car I've never seen, that Leo is presumably driving." Leo, who had been slouched on the couch, sat up straight, his face turning pale. My father just stood there, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then I pulled out the final set of documents. "And this," I said, my voice dropping low, "is the masterstroke, a secret condominium, bought for Leo, with a mortgage you secured by forging my name as a guarantor." I placed the deed, with Leo's name printed clearly as the owner, right on top of the pile. "A $500,000 debt that you tied to my name." The room was utterly silent. The color drained from my mother's face. My father finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Leo looked like he was going to be sick. They were caught. There were no more lies to hide behind. The paper trail was absolute. My mother was the first to break, but not with remorse, with rage. "You had no right to dig into our private business," she shrieked. "We did what we had to do. He's your brother. You're supposed to help him." My father stepped forward, his tone sharp. "If you had just given us what we needed, we wouldn't have had to do any of this. This is your fault, for being so selfish. Your fault." The audacity was stunning. They had committed fraud, stolen from me for years, and now they were blaming me for it. I looked over at Leo, expecting him to say something, anything. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a petulant hatred. Finally, he spoke, his voice dripping with venom. "You ruined everything," he spat. That was it. That was all he had to say. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "How could you, Mom and Dad?" Just anger that his gravy train had come to an end. In that moment, I saw them for exactly what they were. A pack of wolves who had been feeding on me for years, and were now furious that their meal was fighting back. Thank you for staying with me until now. Please show your support by liking this video and typing 1 in the comments below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and are here with me on this journey. Your encouragement is a huge source of motivation. Comment number 1 below and stay with me as I continue my story. I looked at the three of them, their faces contorted with rage and self-pity. There was not a shred of remorse, not a hint of shame. They were not sorry for what they did. They were only sorry they got caught. And in that moment, a profound and final sense of peace washed over me. I wasn't losing a family. I was escaping a prison. I slowly began to gather the documents from the coffee table, placing them back into my briefcase with deliberate care. Each paper was a link in the chain that had bound me to them, and I was now collecting them for the last time. My mother was still shouting, her words a jumble of accusations and sob stories. "You're abandoning us, Caleb. After all we sacrificed for you. We'll lose everything." "You sacrificed nothing," I said, my voice still quiet, but now it held the weight of years of pain. I turned to my father. "And you won't lose everything. You'll just lose my things. My money, my credit, my support." I looked at Leo, who was still glaring at me from the couch. "And you," I said, "you're about to learn what it's like to actually earn something in your life. Welcome to the real world. It's not as easy as you think." I snapped my briefcase shut. The sound echoed in the tense silence that followed my words. I turned and walked toward the front door. "You can't just walk away from us." My father's voice boomed from behind me, a desperate, last-ditch attempt at control. "We are your family. You owe us." "Owe them." The word was so absurd, so twisted, that I actually stopped at the door and turned back to face them one last time. "I don't owe you anything," I said, and my voice was steady, free of the anger that had consumed me for so long. It was just a statement of fact. "You abandoned me a long time ago, when you kicked an 18-year-old kid out of this house. You built this prison of debt and lies all by yourselves. Now you can live in it." I didn't wait for a reply. I opened the door, stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, and closed it gently behind me. I didn't slam it. There was no need for theatrics. As I walked to my car, I could hear their voices rising again from inside the house, a chorus of anger and desperation. But they were muffled now, distant, the sound of a world I no longer belonged to. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away without a single glance in the rearview mirror. I wasn't just driving away from a house. I was driving away from a lifetime of being taken for granted. I was driving toward my own future, one that I, and I alone, would build. And I was finally completely free. After that final confrontation, I blocked their numbers. I filtered their emails to go directly to a folder Mark had access to, just in case they tried anything legally foolish. Then I got on with my life. For the first few weeks, the silence was deafening. I kept expecting a frantic call from an unknown number or for them to show up at my apartment or my office. But there was nothing. The news, when it came, trickled in through a distant cousin who I occasionally exchanged Christmas cards with. She called me about 3 months later, her voice a mix of gossip and pity. "Caleb, have you heard what's happened to your parents?" she asked. It turned out that without my monthly infusions of cash, their carefully constructed house of cards had collapsed with breathtaking speed. The first to go was Leo's sports car. Without my money to make the payments, it was repossessed in the middle of the night. My cousin said a neighbor saw the tow truck hooking it up and hauling it away. Next came the condo. With the mortgage in their names and no way to pay it, the bank foreclosed. Leo, who had apparently been living there, was evicted. He was forced to move back into his childhood bedroom in his parents' house. A prince returned to his parents' crumbling castle. But the biggest blow was the house itself. The second mortgage they had taken out for the condo had put a lien on their primary residence. When they defaulted on the condo, they defaulted on everything. The bank came for the house they had lived in for 30 years. My cousin told me she drove by one day and saw "For sale by bank" sign on the front lawn. They had lost it all. The three of them were forced to move into a cramped, run-down two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The life of suburban comfort they had built on my back was gone. My father, whose health had always been fragile, apparently took it the hardest. The stress caused his condition to worsen, and without the good insurance my money had indirectly paid for, he was struggling to get proper care. My mother, who had never held a real job in her life, had to take a position as a cashier at a grocery store, a humiliation she complained about to anyone who would listen. And Leo, the golden child, was learning that the real world didn't hand out gold stars. Without his fancy car, his downtown condo, or his endless supply of cash, his popular friends disappeared. He apparently bounced between a series of low-wage jobs, unable to hold one for more than a few weeks due to his arrogant attitude and complete lack of work ethic. My cousin said their new apartment was a miserable place, filled with constant fighting. They all blamed each other for their downfall. My parents blamed Leo for being so demanding, and Leo blamed them for being so incompetent. In their desperation, they had turned on each other, the final, inevitable outcome of a family built on greed instead of love. I didn't feel triumph hearing this. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a quiet, somber sense of justice. It was the end they had written for themselves. While their world was imploding, mine was quietly starting to expand. Cutting them off was like removing a tumor. It was painful surgery, but once it was done, the healing could begin. The constant stress that had been a low hum in the background of my life for years was gone. The phone calls, the guilt trips, the endless demands, all silenced. But freedom also brought its own challenges. I realized how much of my identity had been wrapped up in being the responsible son. Without that role to play, I felt a bit lost. On Mark's advice, I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Evans, a kind, older woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through the walls I had built around myself. In our sessions, I finally unpacked the years of emotional manipulation. I talked about being kicked out at 18, about the constant feeling that I had to earn my place in my own family. She helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of financial abuse, and that the guilt I felt was a conditioned response they had trained into me. "You weren't their son, Caleb," she told me in one session. "You were their resource. There's a difference." Her words were a revelation. It wasn't my fault. I hadn't failed them. They had failed me. With this newfound clarity, I started investing in myself. The money that used to vanish into the black hole of the family account was now mine. I used a portion of it to do something I had always dreamed of. I started my own boutique architectural firm. It was a huge risk, but for the first time I was betting on myself, and it felt exhilarating. One of the most healing things I did was reconnect with a part of my family I had lost touch with. My mother's brother, my Uncle Ben. Ben was a quiet, decent man who my parents had cut ties with years ago after he refused to lend them a large sum of money. They had painted him as selfish and uncaring. Now, I suspected there was more to the story. I found him online and sent him an email. He responded almost immediately, and we met for coffee the following week. As we talked, I realized why my parents had ostracized him. He had seen them for what they were long before I did. "They did the same thing to me, kid," he said, stirring his coffee. "Always a crisis, always an emergency." The day I said no, I became the black sheep. Talking to him was like finding a missing piece of my own story. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one who had stood up to them. Finding that connection, that shared experience, was more valuable than any amount of money. I was slowly, carefully, starting to build a new foundation for my life, not with concrete and steel, but with honesty, boundaries, and genuine connection. The years that followed were transformative. My firm, which started as a one-man operation out of a small rented office, began to grow. My designs started winning local awards, and my reputation grew with them. I found that when I wasn't pouring all my energy and resources into a toxic family dynamic, I had so much more to give to my work, my friendships, and myself. About 2 years after the final confrontation, I met Sarah. She was a landscape architect, and we were introduced through a mutual client. She was smart, funny, and fiercely independent. When I eventually told her my family's story, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with respect. "You saved yourself," she said simply. With her, there were no games, no manipulations. Our relationship was built on a foundation of mutual trust and support, things I had never truly experienced before. Last year, Sarah and I bought a piece of land just outside the city, a quiet plot with old oak trees and a view of the rolling hills. And I did what I do best. I designed our home. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest, beautiful house with big windows to let in the light, and a wide porch for watching the sunset. Every beam, every nail, every design choice was a testament to the life I had built for myself. It was my blueprint for peace. Sometimes, late at night, I think about them. I heard through the grapevine that my father passed away a couple of years ago. My mother and Leo are apparently still living in that same rundown apartment, their lives small and bitter. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't even feel hatred. I just feel a profound sense of sadness for the family we could have been, and a quiet gratitude for the life I was able to build in spite of them. This whole ordeal taught me something vital. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect. Love shouldn't come with a price tag, and you should never have to pay for your own seat at the dinner table. I spent years thinking I had to save them, that their problems were my responsibility to fix. I was wrong. Setting boundaries, taking control of my own life, and walking away from toxicity, that's what saved me. To everyone listening, thank you for following my story. It's been a tough road, but sharing it helps me heal. I'd love to hear your experiences. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family, and how did you find the strength to do it? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. If the story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and join me for more.